Nathan Bridger thought he'd buried his capacity for surprise, along with everything else that mattered. But when two Choctaw children appeared at his remote ranch gate, speaking words that would shatter his carefully constructed solitude, he discovered that some promises cut deeper than the scars on a man's soul. The wind across the Wyoming Territory carried more than dust and tumbleweeds that autumn of 1887. It carried ghosts, memories, and the kind of loneliness that settled into a man's, bones like winter frost that never quite thawed. Nathan Bridger had learned to live with all three, though living might have been too generous a word for what he did in the ramshackle ranch house that sat like a weathered tombstone against the endless prairie. At 42, Nathan had the kind of face that spoke of hard winters and harder choices. His beard, more grey than brown now, couldn't quite hide the scar that ran from his left ear to the corner of his mouth, a parting gift from a Sioux war party 5 years back. His hands, permanently stained with soil and cattle blood, moved with the deliberate economy of a man who had learned that wasted motion was often the difference between living and dying on the frontier. He spoke to his cattle more than he spoke to people, and some weeks the only human voice he heard was his own, echoing off the walls of a house built for a family he no longer had. The Bridger Ranch sprawled across 3,000 acres of the most unforgiving land in the territory, but Nathan had chosen it precisely because it was unforgiving. The nearest neighbor was 18 miles south, the nearest town 26 miles east, and the nearest person who might care whether Nathan lived or died was buried in a grave he visited exactly once a year, when the anniversary of his failure demanded penance. The isolation suited him. It matched the landscape of his heart. He had not always been alone. Once there had been Sarah with her laugh that could make even the harshest Wyoming wind sound like music. There had been little Emma, who would have been 12 now if the fever had not taken her, and baby Thomas, who never lived to see his first birthday. The house still held echoes of their voices, phantoms of happiness that Nathan encountered in quiet moments when his guard was down. But mostly, he had learned to live in the present tense, where grief could be managed through routine and solitude could be mistaken for peace. His days followed a pattern as rigid as military discipline, which perhaps they were. Dawn meant coffee black as sin and biscuits that tasted of ash. Morning meant checking the cattle, mending fence, maintaining the endless list of repairs that kept a ranch operational. Afternoon meant riding the far pastures, counting heads, looking for signs of wolves or rustlers, or the dozen other threats that could destroy a man's livelihood in a single night. Evening meant beans and fatback, a glass of whiskey that burned. Away the day's small failures, and sleep that came hard but deep. Nathan had convinced himself this was enough. The ranch turned a modest profit. His cattle were healthy, his land was secure. He owed no man money, and no man owed him friendship. In a territory where survival was never guaranteed, and tomorrow was a luxury not everyone could afford, Nathan Bridger had achieved a kind of success. He told himself daily that solitude was strength, that independence was freedom, that a man who needed nothing from others could never be disappointed by their failures. But on this particular October morning, as he stood on his porch drinking coffee that had grown cold while he watched storm clouds gather on the horizon, Nathan felt the familiar weight of something unnamed pressing against his chest. It might have been loneliness, though he had trained himself not to recognize it. It might have been regret, though he had buried that emotion along with his family. More likely, it was simply the accumulated weight of too many silent mornings, too many conversations with cattle, too many nights when the wind through the eaves sounded almost like voices calling his name. The storm that had been threatening all morning finally broke just after noon, turning the sky the color of old pewter and releasing rain that fell not in drops but in sheets. Nathan retreated to the barn, using the forced confinement to oil leather and sharpen tools, tasks that occupied his hands, while his mind wandered paths he usually kept barricaded. The rain drummed against the barn roof with increasing intensity, and Nathan found himself remembering other storms when Sarah would pull him away from work to dance in the kitchen, while Emma clapped her tiny hands and baby Thomas gurgled from his cradle. The memories came with their familiar sting, and Nathan pushed them away with practiced efficiency, but the storm seemed determined to stir up more than just mud and standing water. As the afternoon wore on, the rain showed no signs of lessening, and Nathan began to worry about the creek that ran along his eastern boundary. In weather like this, it could rise fast and wash out the bridge he had spent 2 summers building. He was preparing to saddle his horse and check the creek when he heard something that stopped him cold. Voices, human voices, calling out over the storm. Nathan stood motionless in the barn doorway, straining to hear over the rain. For a moment he wondered if his isolation had finally cracked his sanity, if the loneliness he refused to acknowledge had begun manifesting auditory hallucinations. But then he heard it again, clearer this time. 2 voices, young voices, calling. Oh, for help! Nathan grabbed his rifle and rain slicker, more from habit than fear. In 5 years of ranching in this remote corner of the territory, he had learned that unexpected visitors usually meant trouble of one kind or another. Rustlers, claim jumpers, drifters looking for easy marks, soldiers pursuing deserters, marshals chasing outlaws. The list of people who might have legitimate business at his ranch was considerably shorter than the list of those who might not. He stepped out into the storm, immediately soaked despite his slicker, and followed the voices toward his front gate. The rain made visibility nearly impossible, but as he drew closer, he could make out 2 small figures huddled against the fence post that marked the entrance to his property. Children, he realized with shock. 2 children alone in a storm that could kill grown men if they were caught unprepared. Nathan approached cautiously, his rifle lowered but ready. As he got within speaking distance, he could see that the children were Indian, probably Choctaw based on their clothing, and the little he could make out of their features through the rain. A girl who looked to be maybe 14 and a younger boy, perhaps 10 or 11. They were both soaked to the skin, shivering violently, and watching his approach with the kind of wary desperation that spoke of people who had run out of options. The girl stepped forward when she saw him, her chin raised in a gesture of defiance that was somewhat undermined by her chattering teeth. She spoke in accented but clear English, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Please, sir, we seek Nathan Bridger. Are you him?" Nathan stopped 10 feet away, studying them both. The boy stayed slightly behind his sister, one hand clutching the hem of her dress. But his eyes were alert and intelligent. Both children were thin, too thin, and their clothes, though clean, showed signs of long wear and careful mending. Most telling of all, they carried no belongings except a small bundle tied with rope that the girl clutched against her chest like it contained everything precious in the world. "I'm Bridger," Nathan said finally, having to raise his voice to be heard over the rain. "Who's asking, and what do you want with me?" The girl's eyes brightened with relief, but her expression remained serious. "My name is Pela. This is my brother Aheka. We have traveled many days to find you, Mr. Bridger. We come to offer service." Nathan frowned. "Service?" He looked past them, expecting to see adults, parents, or guardians who might explain what 2 Choctaw children were doing alone at his ranch in the middle of a storm. But the prairie stretched empty in all directions, rain-lashed and grey. "Service? What kind of service? And where are your people?" The girl's composure wavered for just a moment, but she recovered quickly. "We have no people, sir. We offer ourselves to work for you, to serve your household, tend your animals, whatever you need. We ask no payment, only food and shelter." She paused, then added words that would haunt Nathan for the rest of his life. "We will serve you for nothing. Just keep us and give shelter till death." Nathan stared at her, the rain drumming against his hat brim. In all his years on the frontier, he had encountered many desperate people, but there was something in the girl's voice, a finality that suggested she was not making a casual offer, but a binding commitment. The boy, Ahika, nodded solemnly, as if he understood and agreed with every word his sister had spoken. "Your children," Nathan said, more to himself than to them. "Where did you come from? Where are your parents?" Pela's jaw tightened. "Dead, sir. Fever took our mother 2 winters past. Our father died in the war before that. We lived with our grandmother until the coughing sickness took her this spring." She gestured to the bundle in her arms. "This is all we have left of our family." Nathan felt something twist in his chest, an emotion he had spent years learning to suppress. Orphans. These were orphans, alone in a world that had little patience for children without protectors. He knew something about loss, about the way death could strip away everything that gave life meaning. But these children had kept going, had somehow survived and traveled. God knew how far to reach his ranch. "How did you know my name?" he asked. "How did you find this place?" The girl looked uncomfortable for the first time since she had started speaking. "We heard talk in the town. People said you lived alone, that you might have need of workers who would ask little and give much. We heard you were a man who understood what it meant to lose everything." Nathan's hands tightened on his rifle. Someone in town had been talking about him, sharing details of his personal business with strangers. The thought rankled, but he pushed his irritation aside. These children were soaked and shivering, and whatever his feelings about gossip, he could not leave them standing in a storm that showed no signs of abating. "This is no weather for conversation," he said finally. "Come up to the house. We'll talk when you're dry and warm." Relief flooded both children's faces, but Pela held her ground. "Do you accept our offer of service, Mr. Bridger? We would know our place before we accept your hospitality." Nathan studied her face, seeing something there that reminded him uncomfortably of his own stubborn pride. This girl had made a decision, had chosen to stake everything on this moment, and she would not be moved until she had her answer. It was a kind of courage that humbled him. "We'll talk about it inside," he said. "But right now you're both half frozen and completely soaked. Come on." Nathan turned and walked toward the house, not looking back to see if they followed. But he could hear their footsteps behind him, quick and light on the muddy ground, and when he reached the porch, he held the door open and waited while they climbed the steps. The boy, Ahika, paused at the threshold, looking up at Nathan with eyes that held too much wisdom for someone so young. "Thank you, Mr. Bridger," the boy said quietly. "We will not bring you trouble." Nathan looked down at him, at this solemn child who spoke like he was making a vow, and felt the walls he had built around his heart shift slightly. "We'll see about that, son. We'll see about that." He ushered them inside, closing the door against the storm, and immediately the house felt different, smaller somehow, but also more alive than it had been in years. The children stood in his front room, dripping onto the wooden floors he had installed himself, looking around with the careful attention of people assessing their new circumstances. Nathan realized he was seeing his home through their eyes. The sparse furniture, the cold fireplace, the windows that needed washing, the silence that had become his constant companion. "Pela, Ahika," he said, testing their names. "Those are Choctaw names?" "Yes, sir," Pela replied. "Our grandmother taught us the old ways, but she also taught us English and the ways of the white world. She said we would need both to survive." Nathan nodded. Smart woman, this grandmother. He moved to the fireplace and began building a fire, aware that both children were watching his every movement. "How long since you've eaten?" The children exchanged glances. Pela answered reluctantly, 2 days, sir, maybe 3. We had a little food, but we shared it with other travelers we met on the road. Nathan paused in his fire building. 3 days, without food, and they had shared what little they had with strangers. These children had been raised with a generosity that shamed him. He got the fire started and turned to face them. There's a spare room upstairs, he said. It's not much, but it's dry and warm. You can stay there tonight, get some rest, and tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next. Pela's eyes flashed. We do not seek charity, Mr. Bridger. We offer honest work in exchange for shelter. Nathan held up a hand. I heard your offer, but tonight, you're guests. Tomorrow, if you still want to discuss terms of employment, we'll discuss them. Right now, you need food and sleep, and I need to think. The girl looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion was clearly winning the battle. She nodded reluctantly. Very well, but we will earn our keep, Mr. Bridger. We know how to work. Nathan showed them upstairs to the spare room, a small space that had once been intended as a nursery. He had not entered it in 3 years, and dust covered everything like a shroud. But the bed was solid, the blankets were clean, if somewhat musty, and it would be infinitely better than whatever shelter they had been finding on the trail. As he left them to get settled, Nathan heard Pela speaking to her brother in rapid Choctaw. The boys' responses were quieter, but Nathan caught the tone of exhaustion and relief in both their voices. He went downstairs and began preparing a simple meal of beans, bacon, and cornbread, cooking enough for 3 people for the first time in years. While the food cooked, Nathan found himself pacing the small confines of his kitchen, his mind a churning. 2 Choctaw orphans had appeared at his gate like something out of a fever dream, offering to serve him for nothing more than food and shelter. It was impossible, impractical, and potentially dangerous. What did he know about raising children? What business did a man like him, scarred inside and out, have taking responsibility for 2 young lives? But as he listened to the quiet sounds of movement upstairs, as he smelled food cooking for more than one person, as he felt the presence of other human beings in his home for the first time in years, Nathan also felt something else. Something that might have been hope if he had still believed in such things. Something that might have been possibility if he had not spent years convincing himself that his story was already finished. When he called them down for dinner, Pela and Aheka appeared promptly, their faces and hands scrubbed clean, their wet clothes replaced with garments from their small bundle that were dry but clearly their best. They sat at his table with the careful politeness of children who had learned not to presume, and they ate with the controlled hunger of people who had known genuine scarcity. As they shared their first meal together, Nathan found himself studying their faces in the lamplight. Pela had the kind of beauty that would make her a target in the wrong circumstances, but her eyes held a steel that suggested she could take care of herself. Aheka was quieter, more watchful, but Nathan caught glimpses of quick intelligence and dry humor in his occasional comments. These were not broken children, despite what they had endured. They were survivors. Tell me about your journey, Nathan said as they finished eating. How far did you travel to get here? Pela sat down, her fork carefully. We walked from the Oklahoma Territory, sir. It took us nearly a month. Nathan's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. Oklahoma to Wyoming, on foot, through some of the most dangerous country in the West. That's over 400 miles. How did you survive? How did you know which direction to go? Our grandmother taught us to read the stars. Aheka spoke for the first time since sitting down. And people we met along the way gave us directions. Some gave us food, some gave us work for a day or 2. Most were kind. Nathan set down his cup, humbled once again by their resilience. You said you heard about me in town. What exactly did you hear? Pela looked uncomfortable again. People said you had lost your family, that you lived alone and worked hard but kept to yourself. They said you might understand what it meant to have nowhere else to go. The words hit Nathan like a blow. So his story had become town gossip, his private grief transformed into public knowledge. It angered him, but it also explained how two desperate children had known to seek him out. Someone, probably with good intentions, had marked him as a man who might show mercy to other lost souls. "And what made you think I would want help?" he asked. "Most people prefer to choose their own employees." Pela straightened in her chair. "We are good workers, Mr. Bridger. I can cook, clean, mend clothes, tend gardens, milk cows, and help with birthing animals. Ahika knows horses, can repair harness and tack, and is learning to work with cattle. We do not complain, we do not steal, and we do not run away." The last point seemed particularly important to her, and Nathan wondered what experiences had taught her to emphasize it. "And in return, you want nothing but food and shelter?" "Until death," Pela said simply. "We offer ourselves to your service until death. That is our word, and our word is our bond." Nathan stared at her across the table, this fierce girl who spoke of lifelong servitude as if it were a gift she was bestowing rather than a burden she was accepting. In the lamplight, her face held the kind of dignity that could not be taught or faked, only earned through hardship and maintained through will. The storm outside was beginning to weaken, but Nathan barely noticed. His attention was focused entirely on these two children who had somehow found their way to his remote ranch and were now asking him to accept a responsibility he had never sought and was not sure he could handle. But as he looked at them, as he saw the hope they were trying to hide behind their careful composure, Nathan felt something shifting in his chest, some locked door beginning to creak open after years of being sealed shut. Tomorrow, he would have to make a decision that would change all their lives. Tonight, for the first time in years, Nathan Bridger would not fall asleep to the sound of wind through empty rooms. Tonight, he would sleep knowing that two other hearts were beating under his roof, two other souls were sharing his shelter, two other lives were depending on choices he had yet to make. And for the first time since he had buried his family, Nathan Bridger found himself wondering if maybe, just maybe, his story was not over after all. Nathan woke before dawn to the sound of movement in his kitchen, a sound so foreign after years of solitude that for a moment he thought he was dreaming. But as consciousness fully returned, he remembered the events of the previous night, the storm, the two Choctaw children who had appeared at his gate like phantoms made flesh. He dressed quickly and descended the stairs, uncertain what he would find. The kitchen was transformed. Where Nathan usually faced a cold stove and the prospect of bitter coffee made from yesterday's grounds, he found a fire already crackling in the hearth, fresh coffee brewing, and the rich smell of frying bacon filling the air. Pela stood at his stove, moving with the confident efficiency of someone who had learned cooking as a matter of survival rather than choice. Ahika sat at the table, carefully mending a tear in Nathan's spare workshirt with thread he must have found in Sarah's old sewing basket. Both children looked up when Nathan entered, their expressions alert and slightly anxious, as if they were presenting themselves for inspection. They had risen early, probably before the first hint of dawn, and set about making themselves useful, without being asked. Nathan realized this was their answer to his unspoken question about their place in his household. "Good morning, Mr. Bridger," Pela said, her voice carefully neutral. "I hope you don't mind that we began preparing breakfast. We wanted to show you that we meant what we said about earning our keep." Nathan poured himself coffee from the pot she had prepared, noting that it was stronger and more flavorful than anything he had made in months. "How long have you been awake?" "Since before sunrise," Ahika replied, holding up the shirt he was mending. Pela found eggs in your hen house and milk in your cow barn. The animals seem well cared for, but some of your equipment needs attention. I took the liberty of oiling the hinges on your barn door." Nathan sat down at his own table, feeling like a guest in his own home. These children had been here less than 12 hours, and already they were anticipating needs he hadn't even recognized. It was impressive, but it also made him uncomfortable. Children shouldn't have to be so focused on proving their worth. "You didn't need to do all this," he said. "I told you last night that we would discuss terms today." Pela set a plate before him. Eggs cooked perfectly, bacon crisp but not burned, biscuits that were somehow lighter than the ones he made himself, despite using the same ingredients. "We know, sir, but we also know that actions speak clearer than words. We want you to see what we can offer." Nathan took a bite of the eggs, and despite himself he was impressed. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "Our grandmother," Pela replied, settling into her own chair. "She said that anyone who couldn't feed themselves and others would always be at the mercy of those who could. She taught us that survival meant more than just staying alive." As they ate, Nathan found himself studying the children with new attention. Yesterday's storm and their bedraggled appearance had masked just how capable they were. Pela moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had been managing a household for years, while Ahika demonstrated the kind of attention to detail that spoke of genuine skill rather than mere willingness. "Tell me about your grandmother," Nathan said. "Oh, what was her name?" Ahika answered this time. "Ayana. In our language it means eternal blossom. She was the daughter of a chief, but she married our grandfather, who was a white trader. When their children grew up, most moved to the reservation, but our father chose to work the land instead." "And your grandmother stayed with you after your parents died?" Pela nodded. "She said the old ways and the new ways could exist together, but only if someone was strong enough to hold them both. She taught us to speak English and Choctaw, to read the white man's books and the signs in nature, to survive in your world, and remember our own." Nathan heard the pride in her voice when she spoke of their grandmother, but also the grief. These children had lost not just their caretaker, but their link to their cultural heritage. They were truly alone in a way that went beyond mere orphanhood. After breakfast, Nathan announced that he wanted to see what they could actually do. It was one thing to prepare a meal in his kitchen. It was another entirely to handle the demanding physical work of ranch life. If they were serious about their offer of service, they would need to prove they could contribute meaningfully to the operation. He started them with the morning chores. Pela took naturally to milking his cow, a temperamental beast named Bessie, who usually gave Nathan trouble. But under Pela's gentle hands, Bessie stood calmly, producing more milk than Nathan typically got from her. Meanwhile, Ahika demonstrated an intuitive understanding of horses, gentling Nathan's stallion Thunder with a combination of patience and authority that impressed even Nathan. "Thunder doesn't usually take to strangers," Nathan observed, watching. Ahika brushed the horse's coat with smooth, confident strokes. "Horses know when someone respects them," Ahika replied. "Our father taught us that animals respond to what's in your heart, not just what's in your hands. Thunder can tell I'm not afraid of him, but I'm also not trying to dominate him." Nathan nodded, filing away this insight. The boy understood animals in a way that couldn't be taught, only developed through experience and natural affinity. It was a valuable skill on a ranch where livestock represented both livelihood and survival. As the morning progressed, Nathan set increasingly challenging tasks. He sent Pela to gather eggs from his ornery chickens, expecting her to come back with a few scattered specimens and complaints about the bird's aggressive behavior. Instead, she returned with 24 perfect eggs and a satisfied smile. The hens were upset because their nesting boxes hadn't been cleaned properly, she reported. I tidied them up and spoke to the birds in a calm voice. Grandmother always said that animals, like people, respond better to kindness than to force. Nathan had been collecting eggs from those same chickens for 3 years and had never thought to clean their nesting areas or speak to them gently. Yet this 14-year-old girl had diagnosed and solved a problem he hadn't even recognized. He sent a hacker to repair a section of fence that had been damaged in the previous night's storm. The boy returned an hour later, having not only fixed the immediate damage, but also reinforced 2 other weak sections he had noticed while working. When Nathan inspected the repairs, he found them to be solid, well-crafted work that would likely outlast the original construction. "Who taught you carpentry?" Nathan asked. "No one taught me formally," a hacker replied. "But I watched and learned wherever we stayed. Grandmother always said that useful skills were the only possessions that couldn't be stolen from you." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. By midday, Nathan was running out of tests. The children had proven themselves capable, intelligent, and hard-working. But more than that, they brought something to his ranch that he hadn't realized was missing. A sense of life and energy that made even routine chores feel less burdensome. As they shared a simple lunch of bread and cheese, Nathan found himself relaxing in their company. Pella had a dry sense of humor that reminded him of Sarah, while a haker possessed a thoughtful intelligence that drew Nathan into conversations about everything from weather patterns to animal behavior. For the first time in years, Nathan found himself talking simply for the pleasure of conversation. "You've both proven that you can work," Nathan said finally. "But before we discuss any permanent arrangements, I need to understand what you're really offering. When you say, 'until death,' what exactly do you mean?" Pella and Aheka exchanged glances, some wordless communication passing between them. Pella spoke first. "In our tradition, when someone saves your life, you owe them a debt that can only be repaid through service. You didn't just give us shelter last night, Mr. Bridger. You gave us hope when we had nowhere else to turn. That creates a bond that goes beyond simple employment." "But your children," Nathan protested. "You can't bind yourselves to a lifetime of service based on one act of kindness." Aheka leaned forward, his young face serious. "Mr. Bridger, we have walked 400 miles looking for someone who might give us a chance. We have slept in barns and under bridges, worked for scraps of food, been turned away from dozens of doors. You are the first person who has treated us as human beings rather than problems to be solved or burdens to be avoided." Pila nodded. "We offer ourselves not as slaves but as family. In our culture, family takes care of family no matter what. We are asking you to let us be your family, and in return, we will care for you as we would care for our own blood." Nathan stared at them, these 2 remarkable children who spoke of lifelong commitment with the solemnity of people taking wedding vows. They weren't offering mere labor, they were offering loyalty, dedication, and something that Nathan had thought was lost to him forever. The possibility of belonging to something larger than his own grief. "And what happens when you grow up?" he asked. "What happens when Pela wants to marry, or when a Aheka decides he wants land of his own?" "Then we will face those choices when they come," Pela replied. "But we will never abandon you unless you send us away. That is our promise." Nathan felt something shifting in his chest. Some barrier he had built around his heart beginning to crack. These children were offering him exactly what he had thought he no longer wanted: connection, responsibility, the messy complications of caring about other people's welfare. But as he looked at their earnest faces, he realized that maybe isolation wasn't strength after all. Maybe it was just another form of cowardice. "There would be conditions," he said slowly. "You would both need to continue your education. I won't have you growing up ignorant, no matter how useful you are around the ranch. Both children nodded eagerly. "Grandmother taught us to read and write and to do sums," Ahika said, "but we would welcome more learning." "And Pella," Nathan continued, "you're at an age where you need to think about your future as a woman. I can't provide the kind of guidance a girl your age needs." Pella's chin lifted in the stubborn gesture Nathan was beginning to recognize. "I can take care of myself, Mr. Bridger. I have been doing so for some time now." "That's not what I mean," Nathan said gently. "I mean, you need to understand that this arrangement can't be permanent in the way you're describing. Someday, you'll want a life of your own, a husband, children. I won't stand in the way of that. And I'm telling you that I will make those choices when and if I'm ready," Pella replied firmly. "But I will never forget what you've done for us, and I will never turn my back on my obligations." Nathan realized he was fighting a losing battle. These children had made up their minds, and their determination was as immovable as the Wyoming mountains. Perhaps the wisest course was to accept their offer for now and trust that time would reveal the best path forward. "All right," he said, "finally, we'll try it. But this is an arrangement between equals, not master and servants. You'll earn your keep through work, but you'll also have rights and privileges. You'll eat at my table, not as hired hands, but as members of this household. And if you ever want to leave, you'll be free to go with my blessing and whatever help I can provide." The relief and joy that flooded both children's faces was almost painful to witness. Nathan realized just how frightened they had been, how much hope they had invested in this moment. He felt the weight of their trust settle on his shoulders, like a mantle he wasn't sure he deserved. "Thank you, Mr. Bridger," Pella said, her voice thick with emotion. "You won't regret this decision." "We'll work hard," Ahika added. "We'll make you proud." Nathan cleared his throat, uncomfortable with their gratitude but moved by their sincerity. "Well then, I suppose we should discuss the practical arrangements. Pella, that room upstairs will be yours. Ahika will need to set up something in the loft above the barn until I can build you proper quarters." "I don't mind the loft," Ahika said quickly. "I like being near the animals." They spent the rest of the afternoon making plans and setting up their new living arrangements. Nathan found himself thinking about modifications to the house, improvements to the ranch, projects that would benefit from having extra hands. For the first time in years, he was planning for a future that extended beyond mere survival. As evening approached, Nathan sent the children to settle in while he sat on his porch, smoking his pipe and watching the sun set over the prairie. The storm had washed the air clean, and the sky was painted in brilliant shades of orange and gold. It was beautiful, but beauty had lost much of its meaning for Nathan in recent years. Tonight, however, he found himself appreciating the view in a way he hadn't for a long time. Pella emerged from the house, carrying a cup of coffee she had prepared without being asked. She settled into the chair beside him, her movement still, careful and deferential despite their agreement. "It's beautiful," she said, nodding toward the sunset. "Yes," Nathan agreed. "It is." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the light fade from the sky. Finally, Pella spoke again. "Mr. Bridger, may I ask you something personal?" Nathan nodded, though he tensed slightly. "What do you want to know?" "The people in town, when they spoke of you, they said you had lost your family. If it's not too painful, could you tell me what happened?" Nathan considered deflecting the question, maintaining the walls of privacy he had built around his grief. But these children had trusted him with their story, their desperate circumstances, their hopes for the future. Perhaps it was time to return that trust. "Fever," he said simply. "Same thing that took your mother, most likely. It swept through the territory 3 years ago. My wife Sarah caught it first, then our daughter Emma, then the baby. I tried everything, brought in doctors from back east, but there was nothing anyone could do." Pella was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "Loss like that, it changes you." "Yes," Nathan agreed. "It does. But it doesn't have to define you," Pella added gently. Grandmother used to say that the dead don't want the living to stop living. They want us to carry their love forward, not their sorrow. Nathan felt his throat tighten. It was wisdom he had heard before, from well-meaning neighbors and the circuit. Preacher, but coming from this girl who had known her own share of loss, it carried a different weight. Maybe, he said, maybe you're right. As full darkness settled over the prairie, Nathan found himself thinking about tomorrow, about the work that needed to be done, about the changes that were coming to his carefully ordered existence. It would be difficult, he knew. There would be challenges he couldn't anticipate, moments when he would doubt his decision, times when the responsibility would feel overwhelming. But as he listened to the quiet sounds of a haka settling into the barn loft, as he felt Pela's peaceful presence beside him on the porch, as he experienced the simple pleasure of human companionship after years of solitude, Nathan realized that maybe, just maybe, he was ready to start living again. The 2 Choctaw orphans had offered to serve him until death, but Nathan was beginning to suspect that they were the ones who would be saving him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, and the beginning of a journey none of them could fully predict. But tonight, for the first time in years, Nathan Bridger was not alone. 3 weeks into their new arrangement, Nathan discovered that having Pela and a haka on the ranch was like adding color to a world that had been painted only in shades of gray. The changes were subtle at first, barely noticeable shifts in the rhythm of daily life, but gradually they accumulated into something that transformed the very atmosphere of the Bridger Ranch. The most obvious change was in the efficiency of ranch operations. Tasks that used to consume Nathan's entire day were now completed by mid-afternoon, leaving time for projects he had been postponing for years. With a hika's help, Nathan repaired the roof of the equipment shed, replaced rotted fence posts along the southern boundary, and even began construction of a proper smokehouse. The boy had an intuitive understanding of construction and an eagerness to learn that reminded Nathan of his own younger self. Pela had taken over not just the cooking, but the entire management of the household. She had organized Nathan's chaotic storage areas, established routines for cleaning and maintenance, and somehow managed to make their simple meals feel like celebrations. More than that, she had begun making small improvements that Nathan hadn't even thought to want. Curtains for the windows, a garden plot behind the house, preserves and pickled vegetables to supplement their winter stores. But the changes went deeper than mere efficiency. The house itself felt different, alive in ways it hadn't been since Sarah and the children died. Laughter echoed from the kitchen where Pela hummed Choctaw songs while she worked. Conversations drifted up from the barn where a haka talked to the animals as he tended them. Even the silence felt different, comfortable rather than oppressive. Filled with the presence of people who belonged, Nathan found himself looking forward to meals, not just for the food, but for the company. Pela had a gift for drawing him into discussions about everything from weather patterns to territorial politics, while a haka asked thoughtful questions about ranching techniques and animal husbandry. They were intelligent, curious, and genuinely interested in learning not just how to do their work, but why things worked the way they did. One evening in late October, as the 3 of them sat around the kitchen table planning the next day's work, Nathan realized that he hadn't thought about his loneliness in weeks. The constant ache of isolation that had been his companion for 3 years had simply disappeared, replaced by something he had almost forgotten: contentment. "Mr. Bridger," Pela said, interrupting his thoughts, "we've been thinking about winter preparations. A haka and I have some ideas we'd like to discuss with you." Nathan leaned back in his chair, curious. "What kind of ideas?" A haka pulled out a piece of paper covered with careful drawings. "I've been studying the barn and the equipment shed. If we move some things around and add a connecting walkway, we could care for the animals during bad weather without having to go outside. It would save time and keep us all safer during blizzards." Nathan examined the drawings, impressed by their thoroughness and practicality. "This is good thinking. What else?" Pella opened a small notebook where she had been keeping household accounts. "I've been calculating our food stores and what we'll need to get through winter. If we're careful with rationing and supplement with hunting, we should be fine. But I'd like to expand the root cellar and maybe build a proper springhouse for preserving meat and dairy." Nathan stared at them both, amazed. These children were thinking months ahead, planning improvements to his ranch as if they truly intended to spend the rest of their lives here. Their commitment went beyond mere gratitude or even survival. They were genuinely invested in the success and improvement of their shared home. "Those are all excellent ideas," Nathan said finally, "but they represent a significant investment of time and materials. Are you certain you want to put that much work into a place that might not be your permanent home?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Pela and Aheka exchanged one of their wordless communications before Pela answered, "Mr. Bridger, with respect, I think you still don't understand what we mean when we say we want to stay until death. This isn't a temporary arrangement for us. This is our home, you are our family, and we intend to do everything in our power to make this the best ranch in the territory." Aheka nodded. "We're not looking for reasons to leave. We're looking for reasons to stay forever." Nathan felt something constrict in his chest, a mixture of gratitude and fear that left him momentarily speechless. These children were offering him everything they had, holding nothing back, trusting him completely with their futures. It was a level of commitment that both honored and terrified him. The next morning brought their first real test as a family. Nathan was checking the cattle in the far pasture when he spotted riders approaching from the east, 3 men on horseback, moving with the deliberate pace of people who had official business. Nathan's stomach tightened as he recognized the lead rider, Sheriff Coleman from town, a fair man, but one who took his duties seriously. Nathan rode back to the house quickly, arriving just as the sheriff and his companions dismounted at the front gate. Pella and Aheka emerged from the house, standing close together with the careful alertness of people who had learned to be wary of authority figures. "Morning, Bridger," Sheriff Coleman said, tipping his hat. "Sorry to bother you, but we've had some reports we need to investigate." "What kind of reports?" Nathan asked, though he suspected he knew. "Reports about you harboring runaway Indians," one of the sheriff's companions said. Nathan recognized him as Jake Morrison, a man who made no secret of his dislike for Native Americans. "Word is, you've got Choctaw children living here without proper documentation." Nathan felt his temper rise, but he kept his voice level. "These children aren't runaways. They're orphans who came here seeking work, and I hired them as ranch hands." Sheriff Coleman looked uncomfortable. "Now, Bridger, you know it's not that simple. There are laws about Indian children, requirements for documentation and proper placement. The territorial government has specific procedures." "The territorial government," Nathan interrupted, "wasn't there when these children were starving and homeless." "I was." Jake Morrison stepped forward aggressively. "That don't matter. Rules are rules. And there's been concerns raised about the propriety of a single man housing Indian children without proper oversight." Nathan's hands clenched into fists, and he felt the familiar surge of protective anger he had known as a father. "Are you questioning my character, Morrison?" "I'm questioning your judgment," Morrison replied. "These savages belong on a reservation, where they can be properly supervised, not running free on a white man's ranch." The word savages hit Nathan like a physical blow, and he saw both Pela and Aheka flinch as if they had been struck. In that moment, Nathan realized that his feelings for these children had moved far beyond mere responsibility or even affection. They had become his family in every way that mattered, and he would defend them with the same ferocity he would have defended his own blood. "Sheriff," Nathan said, his voice deadly quiet, "I suggest you control your deputy before I forget my manners." Sheriff Coleman raised a placating hand. Now let's all stay calm. Morrison, that language isn't helpful. Bridger, I'm not here to make accusations, but I do need to verify that these children are here voluntarily and are being treated properly. Nathan nodded curtly. Ask them yourself. Sheriff Coleman approached Pela and Aheka, removing his hat respectfully. Children, I need to ask you some questions. Are you here of your own free will? Yes, sir, Pela replied clearly. We came to Mr. Bridger asking for work and shelter. He has provided both. Are you being treated well, fed properly, housed properly? Better than we have ever been treated in our lives, Aheka said firmly. Mr. Bridger has been kind to us and fair in all his dealings. Sheriff Coleman looked around the ranch, noting the well-maintained buildings, the healthy livestock, the general air of prosperity and good management. And you're happy here? This is our home, Pela said simply. Mr. Bridger is our family. Now, Morrison snorted. Family? That's rich. Indians claiming kinship with a white rancher. Nathan took a step toward Morrison, his patience finally exhausted. That's enough. You've asked your questions and gotten your answers. Now get off my property before I throw you off. Sheriff Coleman quickly intervened. Easy, Bridger. Morrison, go wait by the horses. He turned back to Nathan. Look, I can see these children are well cared for, and they're clearly here voluntarily, but there are still legal requirements. You'll need to file paperwork with the territorial office, get proper documentation of their status. And what happens if the territorial office decides they belong somewhere else? Nathan asked. Sheriff Coleman hesitated. Well, that would be up to the authorities to decide. Then I'll handle the paperwork myself, Nathan said. But these children stay here until and unless they decide otherwise. After the sheriff and his men left, Nathan found Pela and Aheka in the barn, both of them unusually quiet. He could see the fear in their eyes, the old wariness that his acceptance had helped them overcome, returning in full force. Are you going to send us away? Aheka asked quietly. Nathan knelt down so he could look the boy in the eye. No, I'm not going to send you away, but we need to be smart about this. There are people who don't understand what we have here, people who think they know what's best for you better than you do. We've dealt with people like that before, Pela said bitterly. They always think they're saving us from ourselves. Nathan stood and put his hands on both their shoulders. Then we'll deal with them together. But I want you both to understand something. No matter what papers I have to file or what authorities I have to satisfy, nothing changes between us. You are part of this family, and I will fight for you the way I would fight for my own children. The relief in their faces was immediate and overwhelming. Pela threw her arms around Nathan's waist, and after a moment of surprise, he hugged her back. Aheka joined them, and for a moment they stood together in the barn, three people who had found each other against all odds and were determined not to be separated. That evening, Nathan sat at his kitchen table writing letters to territorial officials, carefully crafting explanations and justifications for his unorthodox household arrangement. It was tedious work, made more difficult by his awareness that the wrong word or phrase could result in losing Pela and Aheka forever. As he worked, the children went about their evening routines with determined normalcy. Pela prepared their supper while humming softly. Aheka tended to the animals and secured the barn for the night, but Nathan could see the tension in their movements, the way they stayed close to each other and to him, as if physical proximity could provide protection against the threat of separation. Mr. Bridger, Pela said as they ate their supper, if the territorial office tries to take us away, we won't go quietly. Nathan looked up from his letter writing. What do you mean? We mean we'll run, Aheka said firmly. We'll disappear into the wilderness before we'll let them separate us or put us somewhere we don't belong. Nathan set down his pen, alarmed. That's dangerous talk. Running would only make things worse. Worse than being torn apart again? Pela asked. Worse than being sent to strangers who see us as burdens or problems to be managed? We've been separated before, Mr. Bridger. We know what that feels like. We won't go through it again." Nathan realized they were deadly serious, and his heart ached for what these children had already endured. But he also knew that running would make them fugitives, constantly looking over their shoulders, never able to build the stable life they deserved. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "We're not going to run, and we're not going to let anyone separate us. I have some influence in this territory, some friends who owe me favors. We'll fight this through proper channels first." "And if that doesn't work," Aheka asked, Nathan met his gaze steadily. "Then we'll consider other options. But I promise you this, whatever happens, we face it together. No one gets left behind." Over the following days, Nathan threw himself into bureaucratic warfare with the same determination he had once applied to building his ranch. He wrote letters to territorial officials, consulted with lawyers in town, and even reached out to contacts from his army days who now held positions of influence. The paperwork was Byzantine in its complexity, but Nathan persevered, driven by his determination to protect his new family. Meanwhile, life on the ranch continued with a surface normalcy that belied the underlying tension. Pidna and Aheka worked harder than ever, as if they could somehow earn their place through sheer effort and dedication. Nathan found himself watching them with a mixture of pride and protectiveness that surprised him with its intensity. One morning, as Nathan was reviewing a particularly frustrating legal document, Aheka appeared at his elbow with a cup of coffee and a thoughtful expression. "Mr. Bridger, may I ask you something?" "Of course. Why are you doing all this for us? The paperwork, the fighting with officials, all of it. You could have a much simpler life if you just let them take us away." Nathan looked at the boy, so serious and wise beyond his years, and realized that Aheka genuinely didn't understand the depth of Nathan's commitment to them. It was a sobering reminder of how much rejection and abandonment these children had experienced. "Aheka," Nathan said carefully, "do you remember what you felt like when your grandmother died? That sense of loss, of being completely alone in the world?" The boy nodded, pain flickering in his eyes. "That's what I felt like for 3 years after I lost my family. I thought I was dead inside, that I'd never care about anything or anyone again. But then you and Pella showed up, and suddenly I remembered what it felt like to be alive." Nathan paused, struggling to find the right words. "You asked me why I'm fighting for you. I'm fighting because you saved me every bit as much as I saved you. You gave me back my purpose, my hope, my ability to love. I'm not letting anyone take that away." Aheka's eyes filled with tears, but he smiled through them. "We feel the same way about you, Mr. Bridger. You gave us back our family." That afternoon brought unexpected news. A letter arrived from the territorial capital, bearing official seals and formal language that made Nathan's stomach clench with anxiety. But as he read it, his expression changed from worry to amazement. "Pila, Aheka," he called, and they came running from their respective chores. "What is it?" Pella asked, seeing the letter in his hands. "It's from the territorial governor's office," Nathan said, hardly believing what he was reading. "They're approving my application for legal guardianship. All the paperwork has been accepted, and you're now officially my wards under territorial law." The silence that followed was profound. Then Pela let out a whoop of joy that could probably be heard in the next county, and Aheka launched himself into Nathan's arms with enough force to nearly knock him over. "We can really stay?" Aheka asked, his voice muffled against Nathan's shoulder. "You can really stay," Nathan confirmed. "Forever, if that's what you want." As they celebrated that evening, sharing a special dinner that Pella had prepared with their carefully hoarded supplies, Nathan reflected on how much his life had changed in just a few weeks. The lonely, bitter man who had existed in isolation was gone, replaced by someone who had rediscovered the joy of family, the satisfaction of shared purpose, and the deep contentment that came from knowing he was exactly where he belonged. Looking at Pela and Ahika across the table, their faces glowing with happiness and security, Nathan realized that their offer to serve him until death had been more prophetic than they knew. They would indeed be with him until death, not as servants, but as his children, his legacy, his greatest joy, and he would be their protector, their provider, their father in every way that mattered. Winter came early that year, sweeping down from the Canadian territories with a ferocity that caught even experienced ranchers off guard. By mid-November, snow lay 3 feet deep across the Wyoming prairie, and temperatures plummeted to levels that made outdoor work not just difficult, but potentially deadly. It was during this harsh season that the true test of the Bridger family's bond would come, not from external threats, but from the relentless challenge of survival itself. Nathan had weathered many brutal winters alone, but never with the responsibility of protecting 2 young lives who depended on him for everything. From food to warmth to hope itself, the weight of that responsibility pressed on him with every howling wind and every degree the thermometer dropped. If he made the wrong decision, if his planning proved inadequate, if luck turned against them, Pela and Ahika could pay the ultimate price. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. The first major blizzard struck in late November, a 3-day storm that buried the ranch under 6 additional feet of snow and dropped temperatures to 40 below zero. The wind screamed across the prairie with such violence that it shook the sturdy ranch house to its foundations. While ice formed on the inside of windows, despite the roaring fire Nathan kept burning day and night. But as the storm raged outside, Nathan discovered something remarkable happening within the walls of his home. Instead of the panic and desperation he had expected, he found a sense of determined cooperation that transformed even the most challenging moments into opportunities for ingenuity and teamwork. Pela had anticipated the storm's severity and spent weeks preparing, extra food stores carefully rationed and organized, emergency supplies positioned strategically throughout the house, even entertainment planned to keep spirits up during the long hours of confinement. "I've been through winters like this before," she explained to Nathan as they watched the snow pile up against the windows. "Grandmother taught me that preparation is more important than courage when facing nature's worst moods. You can't fight a blizzard, but you can outlast it if you're smart." Ahika had proved equally resourceful, rigging an ingenious system of ropes and pulleys that allowed them to care for the livestock without venturing far from the house. He had studied the barn's layout during the autumn months, identifying weak points and reinforcing them, creating windbreaks and insulated shelters that kept their animals warm and safe, even in the most brutal conditions. "The horses and cattle know to huddle together for warmth," he explained to Nathan as they checked on the animals during a brief lull in the storm. "But they also need leadership, someone to keep them calm when the wind gets scary. If we stay calm, they stay calm." Nathan watched the boy move among the animals with quiet confidence, speaking to them in soft Choctaw phrases that seemed to soothe them more effectively than any English words could have managed. There was something almost mystical about Ahika's connection to the creatures under his care, an intuitive understanding that went beyond mere technique. During those long, storm-bound days, Nathan learned things about his adopted children that surprised and humbled him. Pela revealed herself to be not just an excellent cook, but a gifted storyteller, entertaining them through the darkest hours with tales her grandmother had told her, stories that wove together Choctaw mythology with frontier reality in ways that made even familiar experiences seem magical and new. One evening, as they sat around the kitchen table while wind rattled the windows, Pella began a story about two children who traveled across the world, seeking a place where they belonged. As she spoke, Nathan realized she was telling their own story, but transformed into something larger and more universal. A tale about the power of hope and the possibility of finding family in unexpected places. The children walked through forests and across rivers, over mountains and through valleys, Pella said, her voice taking on the rhythmic cadence of traditional storytelling. They were tired and hungry and sometimes afraid, but they never stopped believing that somewhere in the world was a person who would understand their hearts. Ahika picked up the story seamlessly, and when they found that person, he was also searching, though he didn't know it. He had forgotten how to be happy, forgotten how to laugh, forgotten that life could be more than just surviving from one day to the next. Nathan found himself drawn into their narrative, seeing his own journey reflected in their words, but transformed into something noble and purposeful rather than merely tragic. What happened when they found each other? Nathan asked, playing his part in the ancient ritual of storytelling. Pella smiled. They discovered that none of them had been broken after all. They had just been incomplete, like pieces of a puzzle waiting to be joined together. Once they became a family, they were stronger than any storm, stronger than any enemy, stronger than any sadness that had come before. As the blizzard continued to rage outside, Nathan felt a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the fire burning in the hearth. These children were teaching him about resilience, about finding joy even in the darkest moments, about the power of stories to transform reality and make even the most difficult circumstances bearable. The storm finally broke on the fourth day, leaving behind a world transformed by snow and ice into something that looked more like another planet than the Wyoming Territory. The silence after 3 days of howling wind was almost deafening, broken only by the occasional crack of ice-laden tree branches and the soft whisper of settling snow. Digging out from the storm proved to be an epic undertaking that took the better part of a week. Snow had drifted against the house to second-story levels, paths to the barn, and outbuildings had disappeared entirely, and several sections of fence had been buried so completely that they wouldn't be found until spring. Thaw! But working together, the three of them attacked the mountains of snow with a systematic determination that gradually restored order to their world. It was during this digging-out period that Nathan witnessed something that forever changed. His understanding of what family meant. They had been working since dawn to clear a path to the barn when Ahika suddenly stopped shoveling and pointed toward the horizon. A thin column of smoke was rising in the distance, barely visible against the gray winter sky. "That's coming from the Henderson place," Nathan said, recognizing the location. "They're about 8 miles southeast of here." Pella shaded her eyes. Against the snow glare, that smoke looks wrong, too thin, too scattered, like maybe their chimney got damaged in the storm. Nathan felt a familiar tug of conscience. The Hendersons were his nearest neighbors, a young couple with 2 small children who had been struggling to make their homestead work. If their heating system had failed in these temperatures, they could be in serious danger. "We should check on them," Ahika said without hesitation. "If they need help, we're probably the only ones close enough to provide it." Nathan looked at his adopted son with surprise. The journey to the Henderson place would be difficult and potentially dangerous, requiring them to travel across miles of deep snow in bitter cold. It would be much safer to stay on their own ranch and assume the Hendersons were managing on their own. "That's a hard trip in these conditions," Nathan warned, "and we don't even know if they need help. That smoke might be perfectly normal." Pella was already heading toward the house. "Then we'll find out when we get there. But if it were us in trouble, I'd want someone to come check." Within an hour, they had loaded a sledge with supplies and set out across the snow-covered prairie. Nathan on horseback breaking trail, while Pella and Aheka followed with the sledge. The journey that normally took 2 hours stretched to nearly 6, but they pressed on through the biting wind and treacherous footing, driven by the simple knowledge that neighbors helped neighbors in times of crisis. When they finally reached the Henderson homestead, they found their concerns had been justified. The family's chimney had partially collapsed during the storm, filling their cabin with dangerous smoke and leaving them huddled in one corner with inadequate heat. The children were showing signs of exposure, and Mrs. Henderson was clearly sick. With worry and exhaustion, without being asked, Pella took charge of caring for the Henderson children, while Aheka helped Nathan assess and repair the damaged chimney. The work was difficult and dangerous, requiring them to climb onto an ice-covered roof in sub-zero temperatures, but they persevered until they had restored the heating system to safe operation. As they worked, Nathan found himself marveling at how naturally Pella and Aheka had stepped into roles as caregivers and problem solvers. They didn't think of the Hendersons as strangers or outsiders. They simply saw people in need and responded with generosity and competence that would have impressed adults twice their age. "I don't know how to thank you," Mrs. Henderson said as they prepared to leave the next morning. "We might not have survived another night without heat." "No thanks needed," Pella replied simply. "We're neighbors. Looking out for each other is what neighbors do." The journey home was easier, with established tracks to follow, and the satisfaction of knowing they had probably saved lives. But more than that, Nathan felt something shifting in his understanding of what they were building together. This wasn't just a family united by convenience or even affection. It was a family committed to being a positive force in their community, a source of strength and assistance for others who might need help. That evening, as they sat around their restored kitchen fire sharing the simple pleasure of being home and safe, Nathan found himself thinking about the future in ways he hadn't for years. Instead of just planning for survival, he was beginning to envision growth, expansion, the possibility of building something that would last beyond their own lifetimes. "I've been thinking," he said to Pella and Aheka. "This ranch has good land, good water, room to expand. If we're smart about it, if we work together, we could build something really significant here, not just a place to live, but a real enterprise that could support other families, provide work for people who need it." Aheka looked up from the leather harness he was mending. "You mean like hiring other hands, maybe building more houses?" "Maybe," Nathan replied. "There are a lot of good people struggling to make it in this territory. Families like the Hendersons, who could use a hand up rather than charity. If we built something bigger, we could offer opportunities instead of just help." Pella set down her sewing and gave Nathan her full attention. "That sounds like you're planning to stay here for a very long time." Nathan met her gaze steadily. "I'm planning to stay here for the rest of my life. This is my home, our home. I want to build something we can be proud of, something that will matter long after we're gone." The conversation that followed lasted well into the night, as they discussed possibilities and dreamed about futures that seemed both ambitious and achievable. They talked about expanding the cattle operation, maybe adding sheep or horses. They discussed building additional structures, creating jobs, establishing the Bridger Ranch as a cornerstone of the regional economy. But underneath the practical, planning was something more profound, a shared vision of belonging and purpose that transformed their little family from survivors into builders, from people who had been damaged by life into people who were determined to make life better for others. As winter deepened, their bonds grew stronger rather than weaker under the pressure of confinement and hardship. They developed routines and traditions that helped them cope with the isolation, creating a rich internal life that made even the darkest days bearable. Pella taught Nathan some of the Choctaw language, while he helped her improve her reading and arithmetic. Aheka learned to play chess and discovered a talent for wood carving that produced beautiful and useful items for their household. One particularly memorable evening in January, Nathan found himself teaching both children to dance, using Sarah's old music box to provide accompaniment. It was a bittersweet moment, filled with memories of happier times, but also with hope for the future. As they moved around the kitchen in simple waltz steps, Nathan realized that he was no longer haunted by his past, but enriched by it, able to honor Sarah and the children he had lost, while fully embracing the family he had found. "Do you think your first family would approve of us?" Pela asked quietly as they danced. Nathan considered the question seriously. "I think they would love you both. Sarah always said that love multiplies rather than divides, that there's always room in a good heart for more family. I think she would be happy that you found me, and happier still that I found you." By the time spring began to show its first tentative signs in late February, the three of them had been tested by isolation, extreme weather, and the daily challenges of frontier survival, and they had not just endured, but thrived. They emerged from their first winter together stronger, closer, and more committed to their shared future than ever before. The bonds forged during those dark months would prove unbreakable in the years to come, tested by challenges they couldn't yet imagine, but anchored in the deep trust and mutual respect they had developed during the long winter nights when they had only each other for company and comfort. They had learned that they could depend on one another completely, that their commitment to being family was stronger than any hardship nature or circumstances could throw at them. Spring of 1888 brought more than just melting snow and green grass to the Bridger Ranch. It brought opportunity in the form of railroad surveyors who appeared one morning in April, their instruments glinting in the early sunlight as they moved methodically across the prairie, mapping routes for the expansion of the territorial rail system. Nathan watched them from his porch, coffee cup in hand, while Pela and Aheka emerged from the barn where they had been tending to a mare about to foal. The lead surveyor, a weathered man named Collins, who carried himself with the authority of someone accustomed to making important decisions, approached the house with obvious purpose. Nathan had dealt with railroad men before and knew that their arrival usually meant significant changes for everyone in the territory, whether those changes were welcome or not. "Morning," Collins said, removing his hat respectfully. "You'd be Nathan Bridger, I assume. I'm Tom Collins with the Wyoming and Colorado Railroad Company. We're surveying a route through this area, and your ranch sits right on the proposed line." Nathan set down his coffee cup, immediately alert. Railroad expansion could mean prosperity or disaster, depending on how it was handled. "What exactly are you proposing?" Collins pulled out a detailed map, spreading it across the porch table. "The railroad needs a depot and switching stations somewhere in this area. Your ranch has the best water access and the most level ground for miles around. We'd like to discuss purchasing a portion of your land for the facility." As Nathan studied the map, Pela and Aheka joined them on the porch, their faces reflecting the same mixture of curiosity and caution that Nathan felt. The proposed depot would be built on what was currently their eastern pasture, requiring them to relocate some of their cattle operations, but potentially bringing tremendous economic opportunities. "What kind of money are we talking about?" Nathan asked. Collins named a figure that made Nathan's eyebrows rise. It was more cash than the ranch had generated in its entire 5-year existence, enough to fund the expansion plans they had been discussing throughout the long winter months. But Nathan had learned to be suspicious of offers that seemed too good to be true. "And what would this depot mean for the surrounding area?" Pela asked, speaking up for the first time. Collins looked surprised to be addressed by someone so young, but he answered respectfully. "Employment mostly. We'd need depot workers, maintenance crews, freight handlers, plus all the businesses that spring up around railroad stops, hotels, restaurants, supply stores. This could become a real town within a few years. After Collins and his crew departed, Nathan called a family meeting around the kitchen table. The railroad offer represented a crossroads in their lives, a decision that would shape not just their immediate future, but the legacy they hoped to build for generations to come. The money would solve a lot of problems, Nathan said, stating the obvious. We could expand the ranch, build better facilities, hire the hands we've been talking about. But it would also change everything about how we live here. Apache, now 15 and showing the lean strength of someone who had spent years doing physical labor, leaned forward thoughtfully. Change isn't necessarily bad. Grandmother always said that the oak tree that doesn't bend in the wind is the one that breaks. Pela, at 16, had grown into a young woman whose intelligence and practical wisdom impressed everyone who met her. The question is whether this change serves our purposes or forces us to serve someone else's purposes. What do we want this place to become? Over the next several days, they walked every inch of the proposed depot site, discussing possibilities and implications. Nathan found himself relying more and more on Pela and Apache's insights, recognizing that they had developed into genuine partners in the ranch's management rather than merely helpers. The decision they ultimately reached was characteristically ambitious. Rather than simply selling land to the railroad and hoping for the best, they would negotiate to become partners in the development of the entire area. Nathan would sell the land for the depot at fair market value, but he would also retain ownership of the surrounding acreage and develop it as a planned community designed to serve railroad workers and their families. If we're going to have a town growing up around us, Nathan explained to Collins when the surveyor returned, we want to make sure it's the kind of town we can be proud of. Good housing for workers, proper schools for children, businesses that serve the community rather than exploit it. Collins was initially skeptical of Nathan's counter-proposal, but as they discussed the details, he began to see the wisdom in partnering with someone who had deep roots in the area and a reputation for fairness and competence. The final agreement they reached gave the railroad their depot site, while establishing Nathan as the primary developer for what would eventually become the town of Bridgerton. The summer of 1888 proved to be one of the most challenging and rewarding periods in the family's history. Construction of the railroad depot began in June, bringing dozens of workers to the area and creating a boom atmosphere that transformed their quiet ranch into the center of constant activity. Nathan, Pela, and Apache found themselves managing not just their traditional ranching operations, but also housing, feeding, and coordinating with a workforce that sometimes numbered over 100 people. Pela took charge of the commissary operation, organizing the purchase and distribution of food supplies for the workers. Her natural organizational skills and her ability to stretch resources without sacrificing quality made her indispensable to the smooth operation of the construction project. Workers who had initially been skeptical of taking direction from a teenage Choctaw girl quickly learned to respect her competence and fairness. Miss Pela, one of the Irish rail workers said to Nathan one evening, that daughter of yours has a head for business that would put most men to shame. She's been keeping us fed and happy when other camps I've worked in barely managed to keep us alive. Nathan felt a surge of paternal pride at the compliment, but more than that, he felt vindicated in his belief that Pela and Apache were capable of far more than most people would assume. They were proving themselves not just as workers, but as leaders, innovators, and community builders. Apache had appointed himself liaison between the construction crews and the local ranchers, helping to negotiate agreements for temporary use of grazing land, water rights, and transportation of materials. His ability to speak both English and Choctaw, combined with his natural diplomacy and his growing reputation for honesty, made him an ideal mediator in situations that could have easily escalated into conflicts. One particularly tense situation arose when some of the railroad workers began helping themselves to cattle from neighboring ranches, claiming they were just supplementing inadequate food rations. The local ranchers were ready to form a vigilante committee, while the railroad supervisors insisted their men were being falsely accused. Ahika proposed a solution that satisfied everyone involved, a formal agreement whereby local ranchers would supply beef to the construction camp at fair prices, with the railroad company guaranteeing payment and the ranchers guaranteeing quality. He personally oversaw the implementation of the agreement, building trust between groups that had been on the verge of violence. "That boy of yours has the makings of a real leader," the local sheriff told Nathan after Ahika had successfully mediated another dispute. "He's got that rare combination of intelligence, integrity, and the ability to make people listen to reason." As autumn approached and the depot neared completion, Nathan began to see the scope of what they were building. The railroad facility was impressive enough, with its brick station house, extensive switching yards, and maintenance facilities. But surrounding it, the foundations of a genuine community were taking shape. Houses for railroad workers and their families lined newly surveyed streets. A general store, a hotel, and a restaurant occupied the commercial district. Plans were underway for a school, a church, and a small hospital. What had started as a simple land deal had evolved into the creation of an entire town, with the Bridger family at its center as founding developers and community leaders. The most satisfying aspect of the project, from Nathan's perspective, was the way it had fulfilled the vision they had discussed during the long winter nights. Instead of just surviving or even just prospering, they were creating something that would benefit dozens of families, provide opportunities for people who needed them, and establish a legacy that would endure long beyond their own lifetimes. But success brought new challenges. As word spread about the opportunities in Bridgerton, more and more people arrived seeking work, land, and a chance at prosperity. Some were genuine settlers and workers looking to build better lives. Others were drifters, gamblers, and opportunists, drawn by the smell of money and the temporary lawlessness that often accompanied boom towns. Nathan found himself serving as an unofficial mayor and chief law enforcement officer for the growing community, a role he had never sought but couldn't abandon, given the needs of the families who had put their trust in his leadership. Pella and Ahika had become his closest advisors, their insights and perspectives invaluable in making decisions that affected the entire community. One evening in late October, as Nathan reviewed the books for both the ranch and the town development project, he realized how dramatically their financial situation had changed. The combination of railroad payments, business profits, and land sales had made them genuinely wealthy by territorial standards. But more importantly, they had established themselves as major players in the regional economy. "We've come along. Away from that night you showed up at my gate in the storm," Nathan said to Pella and Ahika as they shared dinner in their expanded dining room. Pella smiled, though her expression remained thoughtful. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we hadn't found you, or if you had decided we were too much trouble to bother with." "I don't wonder," Ahika said firmly. "We found each other because we were meant to find each other. Everything that's happened since then has just been us living up to the potential that was always there." Nathan nodded, struck by the wisdom in the young man's words. Looking back, it was clear that their success hadn't been a matter of luck or even just hard work. It had been the result of three people who had recognized something valuable in each other and had been willing to invest everything they had in building a shared future. As winter approached once again, Nathan felt a deep sense of satisfaction with what they had accomplished. The ranch was more prosperous than ever, the town was thriving, and their family had proven itself capable of handling whatever challenges came their way. But more than that, they had created something that mattered, something that made the world a little better. The two Choctaw orphans who had begged for shelter until death had indeed served Nathan faithfully, but they had served him as partners and family members rather than as mere laborers. In return, Nathan had provided them not just with food and shelter, but with opportunities to develop their talents, express their leadership abilities, and build the kind of future their grandmother could never have imagined possible. As they prepared for their second winter together, Nathan realized that the scared, desperate children who had appeared at his gate were gone, replaced by capable young adults who were ready to take on even greater responsibilities. The quiet ranch that had been his refuge from the world had become the center of a thriving community that looked to the Bridger family for leadership and guidance. The transformation was complete, but Nathan suspected it was also just the beginning. With the railroad connection established and the town taking shape, new opportunities would inevitably arise, along with new challenges that would test their abilities and their commitment to each other. But whatever the future held, Nathan was confident that they would face it together, as they had faced everything else, with determination, intelligence, and an unshakable belief in the power of family to overcome any obstacle. 10 years had passed since that storm-lashed night, when two desperate Choctaw children had appeared at Nathan Bridger's gate, and the transformation of both the family and the land around them defied every expectation anyone could have harbored. The town of Bridgerton now boasted nearly 800 residents, a brick courthouse that served as county seat, 3 churches representing different denominations, and a railroad depot that processed more freight than any other stop between Denver and Cheyenne. Nathan, now 52, and bearing the silver-touched beard of a man who had earned his authority through decisive action rather than inherited privilege, stood on the balcony of the Bridger Building, a 3-story structure that housed the family's business offices, the town's first bank, and a hotel that attracted visitors from across the territory. Below him, the streets bustled with activity that would have been unimaginable when this had been nothing but empty prairie. But the most remarkable transformation was not in the buildings or the businesses or even the thriving community that had grown up around them. The most remarkable transformation was in the young woman who emerged from the bank's main entrance, her bearing confident and purposeful as she discussed some matter of obvious importance with 2 well-dressed gentlemen who listened to her words. With the deference accorded to someone whose opinions carried real weight, Pella, now 26, had grown into a formidable businesswoman whose reputation extended far beyond the boundaries of Bridgerton. Her investments in railroad stocks, her innovative approaches to cattle breeding, and her establishment of the territory's first female-owned freight company had made her name known in financial circles from San Francisco to Chicago. More importantly, she had used her success to create opportunities for other women and for members of her own Choctaw heritage who faced discrimination elsewhere. The 2 gentlemen with whom she was speaking represented Eastern investors interested in funding a proposed extension of the railroad line deeper into the northern territories. Such conversations had become routine for Pella, who had emerged as one of the most respected business leaders in the region, sought out by financiers and politicians who valued her insights into Western development and her uncanny ability to predict which ventures would prosper and which would fail. Across the street, another familiar figure emerged from the courthouse, his conversation with the territorial judge clearly having concluded satisfactorily based on the handshakes and smiles being exchanged. Ihika, now 25, had surprised everyone by developing into one of the territory's most effective lawyers, specializing in disputes between Native American communities and territorial authorities, land use conflicts, and the complex legal Issues arising from rapid Western expansion, his success in that field had not come easily. Despite his obvious intelligence and his thorough understanding of both Anglo and Native American legal traditions, many established lawyers and judges had initially refused to take him seriously. But Ahika had persevered with the same quiet determination that had characterized his approach to every challenge he had ever faced, gradually building a reputation for thorough preparation, creative legal reasoning, and absolute integrity. Nathan watched his adopted children with the deep satisfaction of a man who had witnessed the fulfillment of potential that others had been too blind or too prejudiced to recognize. The desperate orphans who had begged for shelter until death had indeed remained faithful to that promise, but they had served him as equals and partners rather than as servants, building something together that none of them could have achieved. Individually, the occasion for Nathan's reflective mood was not merely the passage of time or the success they had achieved. Tonight marked the 10th anniversary of Pella and Ahika's arrival at the ranch, and the family had planned a celebration that would also serve as the dedication of their latest community project, a school designed specifically to serve the educational needs of both Anglo and Native American children, the first institution of its kind in the territory. The Bridger Academy, as it would be known, represented the culmination of years of planning and preparation. Pella had provided much of the funding through profits from her various business ventures, while Ahika had navigated the complex legal and political challenges involved in establishing an integrated educational facility. Nathan had contributed not just financial support, but his own hard-won understanding of how to build institutions that would serve their communities for generations. As the afternoon progressed toward evening, guests began arriving from across the territory and beyond. Railroad executives who had learned to respect the Bridger family's business acumen, territorial politicians who valued Nathan's counsel on matters of regional development, Native American leaders from various tribes who saw in Ahika a bridge between their traditional ways and the rapidly changing world around them. Ranchers and farmers and merchants whose prosperity had been built in part on the opportunities created by the family's various enterprises, but perhaps the most meaningful guests were the simpler ones, families who had found homes and work in Bridgerton, children who had received their education in schools the Bridgers had helped establish, men and women whose lives had been touched in some positive way by the family's commitment to building rather than merely acquiring. Among these guests was a particular group that held special significance for Nathan. The Henderson family, whose lives had been saved during that brutal winter 10 years earlier, had prospered along with the rest of the community. Their children, now grown, had established families of their own in Bridgerton, creating a second generation rooted in the town's values of mutual support and shared responsibility. "Mr. Bridger," young Tom Henderson said, approaching Nathan, with the easy familiarity of someone who had grown up knowing him as a trusted family friend, "I wanted you to know that my wife and I have decided to name our new son Nathan after you. What you did for my family that winter, what you've done. For this whole community, it deserves to be remembered." Nathan felt his throat tighten with emotion. The idea that his name would be carried forward by a new generation, associated with positive memories and aspirations, seemed to him a form of immortality more meaningful than any monument or written record could provide. As the formal dedication ceremony began, Nathan found himself thinking about the speech he would be expected to give. He had never been comfortable with public speaking, preferring action to rhetoric, but occasions like this demanded words that would capture the significance of what they were celebrating. Pella spoke first, her voice carrying easily across the assembled crowd as she explained the practical details of how the academy would operate. Her presentation was characteristically thorough and well-organized, covering everything from curriculum design to funding mechanisms to the procedures that would ensure fair treatment for students from all backgrounds. This school represents more than just an educational opportunity, she said, her eyes finding Nathan's face in the crowd. It represents our belief that intelligence and character are not determined by the circumstances of one's birth, but by the opportunities one is given to develop and demonstrate those qualities. Aheka followed with remarks that placed the academy in its broader historical and legal context, explaining how its establishment had required careful negotiation with territorial authorities and tribal leaders alike. His speech was more technical than Pela's, but no less passionate in its conviction that education could serve as a bridge between communities that had too often been divided by suspicion and misunderstanding. Every child who walks through these doors, Aheka concluded, will be learning not just reading and arithmetic and history, but the most important lesson of all, that our differences make us stronger rather than weaker, that what we can build together is always greater than what any of us can build alone. When Nathan's turn came, he found himself looking out at faces that represented every aspect of the community they had helped create. Railroad workers and ranchers, merchants and professionals, Anglo families and Native American families, established residents and newcomers, still finding their place. 10 years ago, he began, his voice steadier than he had expected. 2 children came to my door in the middle of a storm. They were hungry, tired, and alone in the world. They offered to work for nothing more than food and shelter, to serve until death if I would just let them stay. He paused, seeing Pela and Aheka in the crowd, their faces reflecting the same mixture of pride and gratitude that he felt. What I didn't understand then was that they were offering me far more than their labor. They were offering me the chance to be part of something larger than my own grief, larger than my own limitations, larger than anything I could have imagined building. By myself, Nathan's voice grew stronger as he continued. The academy we're dedicating tonight, like everything else we've built together, stands as proof that the most important investments we can make are not in land or buildings or businesses, but in people, in their potential, their dreams, their determination to create something better for the next generation. The applause that followed was sustained and heartfelt, but Nathan barely heard it. His attention was focused on the sight of Pela and Aheka standing together, their faces glowing with the satisfaction of people who had not just survived the challenges life had thrown at them, but had transformed those challenges into opportunities to serve others. As the formal ceremony concluded and the crowd dispersed into smaller groups engaged in conversations about everything from business opportunities to family news, Nathan found himself approached by a figure he had not expected to see. An elderly Choctaw woman, her hair white with age, but her bearing still proud and dignified, made her way through the crowd with obvious purpose. "Mr. Bridger," she said, her English accented but clear. "My name is Ayanna Crowfeather. I am the sister of the woman who raised Pela and Aheka after their parents died." Nathan's breath caught. This was family, the only surviving link to the grandmother who had shaped so much of who Pela and Aheka had become. "Ma'am, I'm honored to meet you. Pela and Aheka have told me so much about their grandmother. She must have been a remarkable woman." Ayanna smiled, her eyes crinkling with memories. "She was, and she would be so proud to see what these children have become, what they have built with you." She paused, studying Nathan's face with the directness of someone accustomed to seeing through pretense. She always told them that their destiny was not to be defined by loss, but by what they chose to do with the life they had been given. Over the next hour, Nathan listened as Ayana shared stories about Pela and Aheka's early years, about the grandmother who had prepared them so carefully for the world they would have to navigate alone, about the cultural traditions and values that had shaped their characters long before they had ever heard his name. "There is something I must tell you," Ayana said as their conversation drew toward a close. "My sister, before she died, had a vision. She saw two children walking a long road toward a man who stood beside a great light, a beacon that guided travelers safely home. She said the children would serve the man, but the man would serve them as well, and together they would build something that would shine its light for generations." Nathan felt a chill run down his spine. The description was too specific, too accurate to be dismissed as mere coincidence. "Did she say anything else about this vision?" Ayana nodded solemnly. "She said that when the time was right, when the work was finished, the children would no longer be children, and the man would no longer stand alone. They would all stand together, and their light would be visible from great distances, drawing other lost souls toward safety and hope." As Nathan looked around at the thriving community that surrounded them, at the school that would educate generations of children regardless of their backgrounds, at the businesses and institutions that provided opportunity and stability for hundreds of families, he realized that the vision had indeed been fulfilled. Later that evening, after the last guests had departed and the three of them sat together in the familiar comfort of the ranch house kitchen, Nathan found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The desperate man who had been drowning. In his own grief, the two orphaned children who had walked 400 miles, seeking someone who might understand their need. "Do you ever regret it?" Nathan asked suddenly. "The choice you made that night, offering to serve until death? You could have had different lives, easier lives perhaps." Pela and Aheka exchanged one of their wordless communications, a habit they had never lost despite all the years and changes that had shaped them. Pela answered first. "I've never regretted a single day of the life we've built together, but I also want you to know that we've kept our promise in ways you might not have realized." Nathan raised an eyebrow, curious about what she meant. Aheka leaned forward, his expression serious. "We promised to serve you until death. We've done that, but not in the way any of us expected when we were just desperate children. We've served your vision of what this place could become, your belief that people could build something better together than they could build apart. And now," Pela added, "we want you to know that our service isn't ending. It's evolving. We're not children anymore, and you're not just the man who saved us. We're family, partners, builders of something that will continue long after all of us are gone." Nathan felt tears prick at his eyes as he understood what they were telling him. The promise made by two desperate orphans had been transformed into something far greater. A shared commitment to values and purposes that would define not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone their work would touch. As the evening wound down and they prepared to retire to their respective quarters, in the house that had grown and changed along with their family, Nathan paused at the window that looked out over the town they had built together. Lights twinkled in hundreds of windows, where families were settling down for the night, secure in their homes, confident in their futures, beneficiaries of the vision that had brought three lost souls together in a storm. The two Choctaw Orphans, who had begged for shelter until death had indeed fulfilled their promise, but they had fulfilled it as family members rather than servants, as partners rather than dependents, as builders of hope rather than merely recipients of charity. In return, Nathan had discovered that the greatest service anyone can perform is not to save others, but to help them save themselves, not to provide answers, but to create opportunities for others to find their own solutions. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to serve the community they had helped create. But tonight, as Nathan Bridger fell asleep in the house where two desperate children had once huddled together in a spare room, he did so with the profound satisfaction of a man whose life had been transformed from a monument to loss into a legacy of hope. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.